Good evening. Welcome to the Menil Drawing Institute. My name is Mary Magsman. I'm the manager of public programs here. And tonight's panel is called Ruth Asawa, Art and Life. Before we begin, I want to share our upcoming program. It's this Saturday. It's BYOB, which is Bring Your Own Beamer. It's a very fun event where we have crowdsource projections all around the outside of the main building. So we encourage you to come to that. Additionally, everyone here is invited to come to have refreshments afterwards outside, and the galleries will be open for a little bit longer if you want to revisit the exhibition as well. Tonight, we're thrilled to have with us 3 distinguished guests who will share their insights and perspectives on Ruth Asawa. First, we have our moderator, Edward Kopp, the John R. Eckel Jr. Foundation Chief Curator at the Menil Drawing Institute, who is also the curator for Ruth Asawa Throughline. Next, we're honored to be joined by Addie Lanier, Ruth Asawa's youngest daughter. She studied literature at UCLA, taught in San Francisco public schools, and later worked at the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation in grants management. Over the years, she supported her mother's career as a grant writer, copy editor, assistant on public commissions, and now she continues to work on her mother's legacy. Finally, we're delighted to welcome Marilyn Chase. She's an acclaimed author, journalist, and teacher. She spent over 2 decades working at the Wall Street Journal and now teaches at the University of California, Berkeley in the Graduate School of Journalism. Marilyn has written extensively on Ruth Asawa's life, and her biography, Everything She Touched, The Life of Ruth Asawa, offers a comprehensive and insightful portrait of the artist. It's available in our bookstore as well. Together, our panelists will explore the intersections of Ruth Asawa's art and life, delving into her creative process and her roles as an artist, mother, educator, community leader, and activist. Join me in welcoming our esteemed panelists as we begin our exploration of Ruth Asawa's art and life.
So thank you, Mary, and good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to have so many of you this evening. And what we are going to do is to really add context to the exhibition, which, as you know, really focuses on the drawings. And tonight we're going to focus more on Asawa as a person, as an artist, and the relationship between her life and her practice. And for her, art and life were not separate things. They were very much closely entwined. And for her, life, or the experience of being in the world with people and with nature, was really crucial. And it was really, life was the key part of her art. It informed it, nourished it, and often life guided her art. And one could also think about the converse proposition. And so we're going to talk a lot about the artist's biography, try to understand how these very special circumstances shaped her life as a person and as an artist. And as a person, we know she was self-effacing, and yet, by all accounts, she was extraordinary individual, highly observant and creative, able to turn the quotidian into the transcendent, and also very generous. And I think that's something that is palpable in the exhibition. So I'm really thrilled to be joined by Addie and Marilyn for this conversation. And Addie as the artist's daughter, and also someone who's for years has been really involved in securing and maintaining the artist's legacy. You will bring a certain perspective, as you will, Marilyn, as a historian, a lover of archives, a writer, and also the author of this excellent biography, which will be republished next year as a paperback. And so what we're going to do is both Addie and Marilyn will give short presentations and we'll engage in a discussion, and of course we'll open to the floor for questions afterwards. So thank you.
Thank you, everybody. I'm going to try and not talk too fast and get through this, but I did a PowerPoint because my sister Aiko and my mother always loved the photographs, and they say, you know, a picture's worth 1,000 words. So my mother was an American artist, and that's important because even though she's of Japanese ancestry, she was an American artist, and she built community wherever she found herself, even in difficult times. And it began really with the farm, where she learned to work really hard. She often said her before and after school was farm work. Her parents were Umakichi and Haru Asawa, and they were immigrants from farming communities in Japan. He fled to avoid the draft in 1902, and she came as a picture bride in 1919, and she's the woman who's standing in the middle there. They farm between 50 and 80 acres a year, depending on the size of their lease. So let me see if I can get this to go. It won't go. There we go. They would have 7 children, and my mother was the middle child. She was born in 1926 in Norwalk, and that's a little farming community outside of Los Angeles. She was raised with her first cousins who farmed nearby, so there was a big group of kids as she was growing up that were related. And here's a picture of her in her 5th grade class photo, 1935, in Norwalk Elementary School. She lived in a board and batten house that had a single bulb for the interior lighting. Nothing hung on the walls. There was a sink, but no other indoor plumbing. And she described her family as truck farmers because the produce they grew was delivered by truck to the LA farmers market every Saturday. They had an outdoor bathhouse where a wood-burning ofuro or hot tub was kept, and it was her job to keep the fire going until all the bathing had been done at the end of the day. And then her mother would use the warm bath water to start the seeds for the farm. And there was also a rice pot, or a rice kama, which is a cast iron pot that her mother used to cook rice for the day. So the woman kneeling there's a rice pot in front of her. You can't see it, but my mother told her that was going on. And she was already recognized as being an artist by teachers and fellow students by the 3rd grade. Here's an example of her work that she did while a student at Excelsior High School. She received an A. You can see an A down on the bottom. And you can see that it's formal and informal, and the difference is symmetry versus asymmetry. When she was 15, Japan bombed Pearl Harbor, and the United States entered World War II. So in 3 months, her father would be taken away, and in 4 months, she and her mother and siblings would be interned. They always referred to it as camp, not as incarceration. And the highlight of this period for my mother was that she got to work with Disney animators who were also interned at the Santa Anita racetrack. It was the first time she got to work with a professional artist, and she was 16. And she didn't have to do any farm work. So she finished high school at the Rower Relocation Center in Arkansas. On the photo on the left, she's standing next to the bean plants outside their tar paper barrack. And she always thought she would be a good weaver because she had strung acres of green beans as a young girl. Occasionally, a couple of the teachers would take the kids outside to sketch. There she is sketching outside. And in this photo, there's a teacher, Mrs. Beasley. She's the woman standing. And she was a beloved English teacher who helped the college-age students find scholarships and schools they could attend through the financial help of the Quakers. There are only 2 known pieces that survived from her time interned, and both are watercolors. On the bayou on the left would have been one of those sketching exercises that she went on, or field trips. And on the right is sumo wrestlers. 50 years after she was interned, my mother would include her family's memories of the incarceration in her Japanese-American internment memorial, which is bronze and on public display in San Jose, California. But to go back to the camps, at 17, she was given permission to leave Rower, and she headed to Milwaukee to become an art teacher. And her 3 older siblings went off to Iowa, so she was kind of an independent spirit even then. In Milwaukee, she she studied, but she also lived as a domestic for families to earn her room and board because her parents were still incarcerated and she had no financial assistance. She gave this ceramic plate to one of the families she lived with at the time, and our estate was able to get it back recently. But when she was done with her 3rd year, they told her she couldn't do her student teaching because of lingering racism. And so it's 1946, she took her friend's advice and found her way to Black Mountain College. And she got a loan from a church in Hawaii to attend the summer session. On the left is Lake Eden and the Studies Building, where all the students had their own study, which was novel. It was in rural North Carolina. And Joseph Albers became her mentor. Many of you must know of Joseph Albers. He's one of the most influential artists and educators of the 20th century. And she was able to take 10 different classes with him over the course of 3 years while she was there. The thing that she said about Black Mountain, it was the first time anybody asked her to think. And you can see she was an incredible draftsperson. These are done when she's 21 years old, 20 or 21 years old. And then in 1947, on the summer, she went to Toluca, Mexico on a Quaker-sponsored volunteer program where she learned to loop wire baskets. And her friend, she wrote a memoir in 1985. Her friend Janet Barber, who's pictured in this photograph, used to call her Slapito and cover her with her serape because she always took cat naps. So that's something that my mother is going to do for the rest of her life, which helps explain how she got so much accomplished. Upon her return to Black Mountain in the fall, she met my father, Albert Lanier, and he was 20 years old from a small southern town via Georgia Tech, where he'd studied architecture. In the picture on the right, it's a drawing of the Minimum House, which was a design that he worked on with other architectural students and built at Black Mountain. And then you can see them pictured lower left at the studies hall. They're an interracial couple. The dining hall was where faculty and students ate their meals together. And you also had student jobs. So my mother was a barber at Black Mountain, and Bucky Fuller made her barber pole out of Venetian blinds. They decided to get married after a year, and he went ahead to San Francisco to start his career. And she went back to Norwalk. Her parents had finally started trying to start their farm up again, and they wanted her to stay with them and help rebuild the farm. And while she was there, she hadn't seen her mother in 5 years. She hadn't seen her father in 6 years. And while she was there, Joseph Albers and Ted Dreyer, the head of Black Mountain, wrote to her and told her to come back to school because they needed her. So she went back. And 1948-49 was very productive for her. She had 6 classes with Joseph Albers. And this collage, which is in the show, was one of his color studies. You can see how the red and green on the lower third vibrate to create a yellow that isn't there. And she really matured as an artist completely. Her job was to run the laundry. These 2 pieces are made using the BMC laundry stamp. And the left stamp bears the initials BMC, and the right reads double sheet. And so these are experiments in density and light and pattern. And then this is one of her paintings from the Dancers series that she did in 1948-49. And you can see her abstraction of dancers' arms overhead, which also prefigures her sculptural forms. During the summer, she had studied with Merce Cunningham, who was a visiting faculty there that summer. So Black Mountain is over. It's 1949 in the summer, and she goes to San Francisco to join my father and get married. And there's a picture of their wedding ring, which was designed by Bucky Fuller. It's 3 interlocking A's. I think it's for Asawa and Albert and all things art. I don't know. Architecture, too, maybe. But during the decade that followed, they'd have 6 children. By June 1950, she had 2 kids, Aiko and Xavier. And also in the photo on the right, we were able to date this sculpture by the age of the children. That is an example of her earliest large suspended sculpture that no longer exists. And you can see how it lacks the complexity and sophistication of her later work. So she's just really working through ideas. These photos were, I think, the first photos taken by Imogen Cunningham of her. And she began a lifelong friendship with Imogen Cunningham, another artist mother who was 40 years older than she was when they met. And Asawa described her as a woman with a brief and biting tongue. By 1952, they welcomed their 3rd child, Hudson. And also in 1952, she discovered how to make her signature continuous form within a form sculpture. And the surface of the wire is continuous, with multiple layers constructed from the center out. So it's like a 3D meander. If you guys do this with your arms, you can see how it just keeps moving in 3 dimensions. She'd also, they were trying to make a living, and they were struggling artists, and so she was trying more commercial applications. These were made with potato prints. She was also had young children, so they'd be making potato prints too. Wallpaper of baby feet, variations. And the last example that I have is on the left, it's a vacuum-formed wall panel in plastic that was based on her paper folding. It was modular, so it was a modular unit that you could join together. And then the image on the right is another wallpaper design, which you might recognize as the cover of the catalog for the Throughline catalog. But none of these designs yielded significant income. They couldn't live off of that. So 1954, my father helped design a show of 4 artists at the San Francisco Museum of Art. And she also had her first show at the Peridot Gallery. On the left, you can see how she's taping her fingers with masking tape to try and prevent the cuts from the wire. On the right, you can see how her sculptures have developed into more sophistication and complexity. This collage is also in this show, and it's made from Zipatone, which was a commercial product used by graphic designers. And she really loved this material because it showed the transparency and would illustrate the interior layers of her sculptural forms. And she made this for a Guggenheim grant application, which she would not receive as well. In 1956, her 4th child, Adam, joined the family, and you'll notice that often her children are sleeping in her sketches. They're filled with sleeping children, dogs, people. She's awake, but they're sleeping. And then in 1956-57, for about a year, she took calligraphy classes with a Zen priest, Hodo Tabasi, and artist friends. And so she began to play with ink and brush, which led to a whole series of plane trees and chairs, kind of calligraphic chairs. And her baby Adam accompanied her to the class while the older children attended a Japanese language class next door, and they were very naughty. So many of you have seen these iconic photographs by Imogen, but I wanted to put them in because it's 1957 and she doesn't have a designated studio. She's working in her living room or on the right in her bedroom as time and her lack of sleep allowed. So all those drawings are posted on the bedroom wall and the sculptures are hanging above the bed, and you get the picture. Here I go. Okay. It's 1958, and I arrive, and I'm photographed again by Imogen in front of a chair drawing that she'd done where she started exploring wide marker tips to create unique marks. And she was really fond of drawing chairs during this period. So the rocker, which is in the show, is really beautiful because it's drawn from both sides. And so there's variation in the sharpness of the line, if you look closely. And then finally, 1959, Paul, the last child, is born. And Paul on a Blanket is also in the show. It combines fine line drawing with a pattern that she drew with a felt marker to create the blanket. And then on the right, you'll see a very complex interlocking multi-lobe form, and it really is kind of virtuoso piece to show how she's figured out how to do this very complex interlocking and interweaving of form. So in 1961, we're now a family of 8, and we moved to Noe Valley. And for the first time, she had a designated studio space in the basement with a concrete floor, a workbench, and shelving. But the funny thing is that everybody could go in there and use all the stuff. So all the kids learned how to use hammers, chisels, saws, pliers, plaster of Paris. It was a big kind of play space for us and her. It wasn't exclusive. Also in 1961, she began exploring tidewire forms, and they're based on a desert plant, a tumbleweed that was given to her. In the photo on the left, you can see that she's constructing the sculpture that is on the wall right back there. And she tried to draw it, couldn't draw it, had to make it in sculpture to see the form, and then she was later able to draw it. But her drawings of tidewire forms move from representational tree forms to increasingly abstract stars. And they're related to the sculpture, but they're very meditative drawings on her own that start from the center, like her sculptures, and branch out. And then kind of the last kind of community period that she built was in 1966. Her oldest children were teenagers, and all of the kids were in school, so she went to the public schools. And she would stay there for the rest of her life. And she began by co-founding the Alvarado School Arts Workshop with other artists and parents. And her efforts to bring art to the public schools has kind of resulted in the Public Arts High School in San Francisco that was founded in the 1980s. But I wanted to play a brief clip where you can hear her voice. And I'm going to just give you some of the vocabulary because it might be a little garbled. But in each school, she wants there to be a triangle of autonomy. And there's a teacher, student, parent, and they're all working together to create this wonderful creative environment. Here goes.
We were all very commonly agreed that we needed something more than what the children were getting. So Ruth arranged to use the Alvarado cafeteria in the summer to plan some workshops with parents.
In each school, there's an autonomy. Each parent, teacher, school decide what their needs are. The idea about teacher, student, parent relationships was to make a very strong triangle of teachers becoming students and students becoming teachers and parents learning from their children. Children can learn that they have control over their own space and their own environment. And by producing a mural on the wall, they're making history for themselves. And they begin to talk about what they've done rather than what somebody else has done.
And I don't think anyone but Ruth really dreamed how big the program was going to become. From one school to 40 schools in 6 years.
I like to work with children because they teach me a lot. And one of the things that children have is that they're still honest.
So literally, she really loved these children. So she would invite them to come to her house where they could see an artist working. Here she's welding a 12-foot sculpture that would eventually live on the Oakland Museum. She would often take them into her garden as well, where she might have planted some carrots and radishes in advance so that they could pull something from the ground. And then I just wanted to include a couple of drawings that are plants from her garden. So it was the loquat tree on the left and rhubarb stems on the right. She always had a rhubarb plant to make pies. And she was a great cook. Paper folding and origami was something that she studied and taught until she couldn't use her hands in old age. And the paper fold on the right, I believe, is in the show. Is that right?
It is.
And then coinciding with her work in the schools from 1966 to 2002, she made public commissions. And most of them are in San Francisco, but they're so different from each other, you wouldn't know they were made by the same person. So the one on the left are the mermaids at Ghirardelli Square, if any of you have seen that, with the frogs. The one in the center is the San Francisco Hyatt Fountain, which is on Union Square. It's made out of baker's clay. And the one on the right is Aurora paper fold, based on a paper fold, but it's stainless steel. And through it you can see the Bay Bridge. But it gave her a chance to work with other artists, foundries, architects, landscape architects, and builders. She just loved being in bigger communities to make things. Her home became a community meeting space for local politics and school activism. And this photo shows her living room ceiling in 1995. So the meetings would take place underneath these sculptures, which have all now moved into museums and private collections. But she had these huge 10-foot butcher block tables where they planned the revolution. And beginning with the San Francisco Arts Commission in 1966, she served on and attended hundreds of meetings as an advocate for the arts. And so there are lots and lots of meeting sketches in her sketchbooks, and her last official stint was as a trustee of the Fine Arts Museums of San Francisco. And right now there's a large group of her sculptures that hang in the Education Tower at the de Young. And then I wanted to show this picture of her at the exterior wall of her home. And she installed ceramic masks, which she created by casting an individual's face one at a time over many, many years. We know that there's probably at least 400, but we're not sure how many more. Her goal was 10,000, but that didn't happen. But this installation now lives at the Cantor Museum at Stanford University, and it also houses her archives. And then even after all of the kids were grown, we continued to live in Noe Valley, and we've raised our families there. This is my brother Adam, who passed away in 2003, but he often fished in the bay, and he would bring his catch for everyone to share. And she would make prints of them from time to time. So there's a fish print in this exhibit as well. And then I just wanted to leave you with kind of a quote it was from a lecture that she wrote up about Joseph Albers. But she really did draw every day, whatever was at hand. And the point for her was to keep her eyes and hands ready so that she could see when the need arose. It was always to be prepared. She explained that art experience was not merely a matter of painting or drawing, but mainly of seeing. And Marilyn, did you want to say something about the next slide or no?
I think it's just going to be put up.
Yeah, at the end.
Okay.
At the end.
Okay, yeah.
Sure.
So that's my spiel.
Hello, I'm Marilyn, and let me just take a moment to thank Edward Kopp and everyone at the Menil collection, including Mary Maximin, Tony Martinez. I'm so honored to be here in Houston for Ruth Asawa Throughline to talk about Asawa's life and art, and what a treat to see all those powerful and poignant images shared by Addie, and to hear her intimate insider's account of being, to borrow a phrase from the musical Hamilton, in the room where it happened, as a witness to the creation, a participant to creation of art. I'm the other half of the apple. I'm a writer approaching Ruth Asawa's life from the outside in. To begin, I'll take you back to the summer of 2014. It had been just 1 year since the world lost Ruth Asawa, a loss that was felt especially keenly in my city of San Francisco, where she is so beloved, and her presence is everywhere, literally everywhere, from museums to schoolyard murals, gardens, classrooms, and streets, where her sculptured fountains have pride of place. I was happening to read a news article about the fact that the family had given Ruth Asawa's papers to Stanford University. It happens to be my alma mater. I thought it would get me into the archives. It actually didn't. But as a longtime news reporter and an author who loves archives, this was beyond exciting. I couldn't wait to see what was in this treasure trove. And so I called right away. It turned out they weren't ready. But the next spring, in March of 2015, as soon as the archival materials were all collated and all neatly tucked away in their acid-free manila folders and boxed in their elegant dove gray archival boxes, I began daily drives to Stanford and spent 18 months paging and reading through this treasure trove. It was then comprising 275 boxes of her letters, date books, calendars, photos, sketches, designs, contracts, Christmas cards, even the little notepad that people kept by their phones when all of us had landlines. I also began interviews with more than 80 of her family, friends, classmates, and colleagues to start to try to put together these pieces of research like a beautiful mosaic, and to render in a narrative which I hoped to do justice to her remarkable life in art. In all, it took about 5 years to produce my book, Everything She Touched, The Life of Ruth Asawa, which came out in 2020. And as Edward generously mentioned, it'll be in paperback next year, just ahead of the Asawa Centennial, which I know will be a very special milestone. I know Edward was wanting to know what moved me to attempt a biography of this icon. What chutzpah, right? Coming from a mere news reporter, an ink-stained scribe, but the existence of the archive was the bait. And the hook was that, first, after the initial excitement, I thought, oh, well, surely it's been done. I have to check the literature. It turned out that at that time, in all the oceans of beautiful scholarly writings, there had as yet not been a life of Asawa written for the generalist reader, someone who loves art and is curious, but is not a specialist, not an art historian or curator or an artist. Looking at Addie's powerful images, I'm once again astonished at her ability to create breakthrough art and a fresh and energetic brand of civic activism. It's hard to describe, if you're not a San Franciscan, how she revolutionized the teaching of art in the public schools. After experiencing traumas that would crush a lesser soul, rural poverty, racism, World War II imprisonment, gender bias, and many more obstacles. So to me, Ruth's story stands alone as an American hero's journey, and how improbable it was. You've heard how as a young girl she was raised on a truck farm in Depression-era poverty, working the earth alongside her family every day, contributing hard labor, feeding the fire into the bathtub, stringing the string beans, and much more, adding to their frugal existence where nothing was wasted, not even a bent nail, which Mr. Asawa would straighten out to reuse. She seized the chance to make art in public school and would even trace figure 8 designs in the earth when riding on the back of her father's farm vehicles. But this bucolic existence of hard work, the rhythm of working the earth and going to school, was smashed after Pearl Harbor and the outbreak of World War II, when Mr. Asawa, as you've heard, was seized by the FBI straight out of his strawberry plants as he was tending his crop in February 1942, and was sent to an extremely harsh Department of Justice camp in New Mexico, and as nearly as I can figure out from reading files at the National Archives and Records Administration, was that Mr. Asawa was a force in his community. He was a quiet, humble man, but he was a very productive truck farmer. And he gave his children the benefit of a cultural education. He sent them to Japanese school where they learned calligraphy, and he taught them the art of kendo, or the athletic discipline of kendo. This was thought of as highly suspect, and it was at a time when the government was extremely fearful of sabotage, which of course never occurred. He was sent away with his family left in the dark as to where he was. In April, the family went first to Santa Anita racetrack, where they lived in a horse stall. You can just try to imagine the sensation of that. A few months later, they went to Aurora Relocation Center in Arkansas, which is a kind of bureaucratic euphemism for a prison camp with barbed wire and gun towers and spotlights. Ruth was 16. Imagine your sweet 16 year. The Asawas were among about 120,000 Japanese Americans incarcerated by the government, again for fear of spying or sabotage that never happened. So we are lucky to have some teenage writings that Ruth did, oddly enough, for the relocation center. But she was always inclined to make the best of things, to see the bright side, to see opportunity in any ordeal. But we still have to bear in mind and maybe picture in our mind's eye are the barbed wire and gun towers, and people wrote about the storms of the wind-driven dust, especially in Arkansas, or snow sifting through the cracks in the barracks, which were very hastily built. No privacy, water that tasted of sulfur, and mess halls that served up rations to the tune of 37 cents per day per capita. Just imagine, that's 37 cents a day. So with an artist's eye, she created these bayou watercolors that Addie has shared, and the sumo wrestling matches, which were part of the allowed recreation along with baseball and softball. Ruth also described with an artist's eye the ochre-colored soil in the drab barracks, which her mother's seeds brought from home, dressed up with a little tiny garden in the little front yard. With a fortitude beyond her years, she thrives by finding artist instructors, first the Disney animators she met in Santa Anita, and later camp art teacher Mabel Rose Jemison, who took students on sketching field trips outside the barbed wire perimeter of camp. Also the English teacher Louise Beasley, who actually somewhat daringly confided to Ruth she knew that Ruth's people suffered a great injustice, but that she, Ruth, should look to the future, always look to the future. And as was her habit of turning misfortune into opportunity, she used time away from farm chores to make art, even sketching her classmates for her high school yearbook when cameras in camp were forbidden as contraband. You couldn't have radios, you couldn't have knives, you couldn't have cameras, unless you were in charge. But Ruth drew wonderful caricatures of her students for the high school prophecies page of her yearbook. Most likely to succeed, most artistic, that was Ruth, of course. Best smile, most popular, best dancer, and so forth. On graduating from the camp high school, Ruth is released to go to Milwaukee State Teachers College. She couldn't go back to the West Coast because the war was still on. And so she had plans to become an art teacher and enjoyed the learning there. But after 3 years, as you've heard, she's denied a student teaching post due to lingering racism and is deprived of her degree. So with no income, no practical career in hand, she arranged this stipend and goes to the fabled art mecca of Black Mountain College, where she would meet her mentors, the Bauhaus painter Josef Albers and the futurist engineer Buckminster Fuller, and would also take a now famous nature hike where she would meet the love of her life, architecture student Addie Lanier. What's amazing to me, and which I still don't fully understand, is how she was able to waste no time or energy on bitterness about the past. And with a wisdom beyond her years, she distilled her philosophy of life as a 22-year-old artist writing, and correct me if I've got this age wrong, in 1948 to Addie Lanier, by now her fiancé. And I'm quoting, "We have all suffered intolerance innocently. I no longer want to nurse such wounds. I want to wrap fingers cut by aluminum shavings and hands scratched by wire. Only these things produce tolerable pains." She would go on to seize life on her own terms, quietly defying convention in 1949 to make a love marriage across racial lines, just months after it was legalized in California, and a full decade before the famous Loving versus Virginia decision made it legal all over the country. They took time to bring their parents around to the match, but the mentors, Albers and Fuller, gave their blessing right away, as you've heard, sealing the deal with that unique and elegant wedding ring. In a San Francisco artist loft above an onion warehouse. How's that for romance? It's truly a la boheme. The couple married in front of a small circle of family and Black Mountain College friends. Albert Lanier, who was an amazing raconteur, wrote and told a story, probably an oral history first, I'm not sure, about their wedding day. And the family generously shared some of his stories that they committed to writing. And you have to read his story about their wedding ceremony. It's just, it's indescribable, and I wouldn't pretend to try to capture Albert's style of raconteurship. But faculty friends sewed her wedding dress. It was a two-piece dark wedding dress, very avant-garde, and made her a hat. I wish there were extant pictures of it, but I've never seen them if they are. The couple settled in as newlyweds, with Albert designing houses and Ruth developing the wire looping technique she'd learned in Mexico. And they started welcoming the first of Ruth's ideal family of 6 children. So life and art were inseparably intertwined. I was very lucky. For my interviews, I was fortunate to locate 2 of her Black Mountain College classmates, the collagist Mary Parks Washington and the painter Susan Weil. Both artists recalled Ruth's work ethic with such freshness and such affection. They remembered her precocious artistry and her humility about really digging in to keep Black Mountain College afloat. It was the poor school, it was rich in art, but all the students had to dig in and help. Mary Parks Washington, who recently died, had marveled at Ruth's muscle doing the heavy work of driving tractors and breaking ground for planting at the college while she, Parks Washington, was making peanut butter sandwiches and punch. Susan Weil, who is still working in New York at age 94 today, told me back when we spoke, quote, "Ruth was a beautiful, quiet person. The rest of us were students, but she was an artist. She had Albert's approval and his respect, and that was unique." Another striking facet I find was her holistic embrace of life in a mid-century arts culture when many female artists in the 1950s in the abstract expressionist movement decided that to be artists with a capital A, they would have to bypass the pleasures of a family, having a marriage and children. I'm thinking of the book many of you may have read, Mary Gabriel's 9th Street Women. She addresses that. Asawa went the other way. She bucked the trend, choosing marriage and children very intentionally while being present in the creative space in her home, fully committed to art and life without walls, which I find extraordinary. But this wasn't a Hollywood plot with a simplistic happy ending. There were so many obstacles in her way. She made it look so easy. We tend to forget these things. Asawa's work in sculpture, drawing in space, as she called it, to relate it to this wonderful exhibition, collided with narrow-minded critics who dealt in ethnic and gender stereotypes and who framed her work as a West Coast craftswoman making nice, decorative, feminine, oriental pieces, oriental in quotes, they actually used those terms. But Asawa ignored the tired tropes of the 1950s, refusing to be labeled, and she swept aside the skeptics to draw, paint, and sculpt on her own terms. Another big challenge was her diagnosis with lupus. It was 1985, and she was almost 60 and juggling several huge public commissions at the time. The autoimmune condition, of course, alters sensation and balance and strength and steadiness of hand and other systems of the body. Doctors prescribed a potent cocktail of chemotherapy and steroids that left her sleepless in order to calm her immune system. But never idle, she returned to her love of drawing as she healed. She also wrote her way through long nights of insomnia, leaving us a treasury of poetic reflections on life and art in sickness and health. If I could share a favorite anecdote, one of Asawa's physicians told me a story that sheds light on her humor and also her generosity. When she was hospitalized with complications of lupus, she had a unique way of greeting doctors on morning rounds. Having kept her hands busy with origami, the art of folding paper, she had made an origami camera, inside of which she had hidden a tiny sketch of the doctor. So imagine, when they would come in on morning rounds, she'd hold up the camera and click, out would come the little photo as a gift. And it seems so, I mean, who does this? It seems so typical of Asawa that she was thinking of others while she was fighting for her life and health. Luckily for us, she achieved a lasting remission and went on to complete decades more work in all media, including the Japanese American Internment Memorial in San Jose, which is extraordinary and where she got to tell her generation's experience in World War II in bronze. All the time making art, she was also raising her family, volunteering in the classroom, as you've heard, marshaling support to revolutionize the teaching of art in public schools. She helped found a high school devoted to an art-centered curriculum, which is now named for her, the Ruth Asawa San Francisco School of the Arts. And you have to get it right, because some people want to create shortcuts that don't give her due. And atop her studio practice, all of this civic activism took real grit and organizational chops and countless meetings, endless meetings, armed with her sketchpad. One of her friends in the arts education movement recalled their first meeting where she unknowingly sat next to this nice woman with a salt and pepper bob, sporting chunky handcrafted beads and holding a jar of homemade pickles. And as they chatted and munched, they bonded over their common passion for school arts. And when it came time for her to speak, the younger woman got up and made some fiery remarks in favor of art in the schools. And the older woman said to her, "You're a real hot pepper." Only later did it come out that the lady with the pickles was Ruth Asawa, who, true to form, gifted her new friend a drawing of a red hot pepper. Another observer of Asawa's magic in the schools was the ballet dancer Jacques d'Amboise, who came to San Francisco to teach dance in to the public school kids. And like many Asawa friends and allies, he ended up visiting one of her schoolyard gardens. She always believed that teaching art and gardens should go hand in hand. But in this particular school, the garden patch was way, way too small to give each child a flower of their own as she wanted. So after each class marched out to plant their bulb and then marched back in, ready for the next class to come out, Asawa would dig them up, pat down the dirt, get ready for the next class. And d'Amboise thought this was great. He thought this was just a terrific sleight of hand. And as he recounted to me in an interview, as every class came out, each child would point to a plant and exclaim, "There's mine." And even in a teeny tiny patch of dirt, she could sow once and reap multitudes. Another sort of through line in her story. So to achieve such a prolific output in her 87 years, we know she slept little, worked nonstop, fed her friends at her bountiful table, loved generously, and taught us all so much about survivorship, civic engagement, being better partners, parents, and citizens. She didn't suffer fools, but she taught her lessons with a playful spirit. One philanthropist who worked closely with her told me, quote, "Ruth was shrewd, but very elf-like, like a cloud, razor sharp about what was real and what was phony. She would bounce around, graceful and joyous, innocent, but not innocent. She wore her heart on her shoulder, but if anything was out of line, she would call it. She knew who she was," unquote. Well, as a writer on the outside looking in, I'm grateful for who she was and for the chance to depict her life through the written word. Thank you so much, and now I'll hand it back to Edward and Addie, the real experts.
So Marilyn, I had a question. You came to this project really with no preconceived ideas, and I wanted to ask you what struck you the most about, what surprised you the most about Ruth Asawa as a person. I mean, you've mentioned some of the, how graceful she was in the face of difficulty.
That was the biggest surprise, and one reads it again and again. She bore no bitterness for what happened during the war years, and I couldn't wrap my head around it. I couldn't understand it. That was a big surprise. One just has to keep studying and kind of meditating on it. One of the other big surprises was we've heard her speaking voice and how direct and humble and with a kind of simplicity in the sense of elegance. There was also her written voice. She was an amazing writer, and if it weren't for those nights of insomnia, I wonder if we would even know that. That was another big surprise. And then a third surprise kind of linked with that was, and it also relates to the beauty of her writing, were the love letters that passed between Albert Lanier and Ruth Asawa when they were, I think, all but engaged in intent, but still working out between the two of them the terms on which they could both be artists and true to their art and true to their love for each other. And the family was generous enough to share those and let me quote from them. And the eloquence of her written voice is just dazzling. So many surprises.
So Addie, how did she do it? 6 children and such a prolific career, and then she's, there's several artists in one. She's so broad.
She never slept. I mean, she slept very little, and she really did catnap, because she would, when she was a child, they would start early in the morning. I think they started 4 or 5 in the morning, before school, go to school, come back, work until it got dark at night. And so she was raised to be able to do this eternal cycle of constant motion. Her siblings were similar in that way. So I also think that, some people use dreams maybe to restore themselves at night. But if she's up late at night doing these drawings, which she was often, I think there was a form of meditation going on that she was actively engaging in, and she was producing some work as a byproduct of it, but she was somehow restoring herself as well. But it was pretty intense, and she was nonstop in every way. She mopped the kitchen floor like every day. It's just, how could you do that? And, get the meals for 8 people. I mean, the shopping, the cooking, we all had to help, of course, but there has to be somebody running the show and all of that, and a lot of energy.
Yeah, I like what you said about the sort of restorative aspect of art making, and there's one drawing in the show which is really a great example of that, is the section of the redwood tree, which is in this gallery, where clearly she went through probably, hours, if not days, of line making. Drawing.
Why is she doing that? I mean, she actually called it the torture exercise in the film, but it's this completely intense, obsessive line after line after line,
So I had a question for you both, and I always wondered how central, or what did she make of her Japanese origins? I mean, we know there's a few facts. She would go to Japanese school. There's some drawings in the exhibition that have a kind of slight Japanese character. There's the fish print that is, connected to an old tradition from Japan. But beyond that, what did she make of that, of these roots of, in terms of identity, in terms of...
Well, she always said that Joseph Albers taught her more about Zen Buddhism than her upbringing. And she was a cultural Buddhist. I mean, she lived Zen Buddhism. She didn't practice Zen Buddhism. And then suddenly there's Joseph Albers talking about Taoism and Confucianism and Buddhism and positive and negative and the yin and the yang, all these kinds of ideas. And she felt that was... he made her think about it in a way that she'd never thought about it, and he made her see it in her work too, in a way that she didn't understand she was doing necessarily. Yeah.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
I think now it's time to open up questions from the audience. And so if you want to ask a question, just raise your hand, and my colleague, there's a question here.
Hi, I have a question for Addie. Everybody, of course, always talks about her teacher Albers, but I'm curious about her other teacher that isn't mentioned in detail, Buckminster Fuller, who was gnomically creative and holistic in thinking. And I'm curious if you have any observations from seeing him around the house, his visits, and sort of how she might have talked or felt about him, because I just find that sort of a lacuna in what I've learned to understand about her. Thank you.
Bucky Fuller his intelligence was so beyond her comprehension on some level. I mean, if you've listened to Bucky Fuller speak, it's very hard to follow. But he was, everything is possible. Omni this, omni that. He would talk about, like when she was talking about the triangle of autonomy. I know that's Bucky Fuller speaking, because he's talking about the tetrahedron, the strongest structure. And they would do paper folding together, the dodecahedron, ikasaso, all this kind of, the great circle, the power of 9. He would come to our house and they would have these sessions together of just such deep affection for each other. And he just loved her, he loved my father. It was a real treat when he came to town, because he was often flying to and from like India or going from Illinois east. And so if he was in town, it would be a big, special dinner, all this kind of a magical time. But, I was pretty young too at the time. So I do think what Bucky Fuller taught her was that my father and her both believed, as Bucky believed, that the power of the individual is more potent than any of us really know. And their lives are examples of that, totally. Did that kind of answer it? Yeah, okay, yeah.
Well, I have a question. So what kind of mother was Ruth Asawa? I mean, what was allowed, what was required of you?
She was really tough. And we all had to learn to work. We had to learn to work early in life. She made my older 3 siblings go pick apples for 3 summers in Sebastopol so that they could learn what farm work was. Do you know what that is? It's like daily things. At the end of the day, they could all go swim in the river. I was too young. I'm one of the younger ones. But we all learned to work. We all learned to garden. We all learned how to make things. We were told a lot of things in life you may not like. You got to just get on with it and do it. So she was tough. But she was also... She loved to laugh, and she was always amused. There was a gentleness to her as well that was kind of, there was a presence to her she could pinch us and we would just get right in line. All she had to do was go like that. So, at least for me, anyway, yeah.
This is just wonderful. Thanks so much for sharing with us. I have another domestic question. You talked about dinners. What was she great at cooking?
Oh my goodness. Okay, so she learned to cook probably at Black Mountain. Well, she was raised. The staples in the house were very Japanese, so it was soy sauce, ginger, and garlic. But then she had some of this European fresh herbs from the European refugees. So there was tarragon and parsley, and of course we had cilantro too, and rosemary. She made kosher pickles every year. That was grape leaves and garlic. That was Mrs. Yalowitz's recipe. She made loquat chutney, a satsuma plum jam. Her chicken was to die for. And my father's from the South, so she could whip up gravy out of nothing. You know how you have to have gravy for everything? Yeah, so she was not a baker. She did not bake. But if she did bake, it was often comic. Yeah.
Oh, there's a question.
What's your favorite memory?
Of my mother? Well, I kind of repeat this often with people, is that there was some kind of woo-woo about her. You know, when you think California woo-woo, you know, like serendipity, things coming through and say, wow, what a weird coincidence. There's a lot of that with her. And there's a lot of that with people who get involved in working on her project, on her life, or on her artwork, or my son has the greatest story. He went to, recently, he went to a bachelor party in San Francisco. And as Marilyn says, my mother was very much in the schools and everything. He went to a bachelor party and he said the shocking thing was 60% of them had had their face cast by Ruth Asawa, and he didn't know them prior to, he was one of the 60%. So he said, how is this possible? But it's that kind of strange coming together of people, and so my mother was very much that kind of inclusive person. So everybody was welcome, come to the table kind of thing. And that's what I kind of appreciate about her. It was exhausting being her child because the house was full of people all the time and meetings and, you know, on and on, because she was changing the world, right? But in retrospect, I really do appreciate that about her.
Thanks so much for the presentation from everybody. I'm wondering if anyone could speak to the dance that's in the dance video that's in one of the galleries. I know that she was at Black Mountain with Merce Cunningham, and in the video they're manipulating her. Were those designed as costumes, or were they pieces that were appropriated as costumes? The paper folded structures, and are they paper, and any information? I'm a dancer, and I just read the oral history of the Village Voice, which covers politics and film and theater and the music scene, and there is not one chapter about the entire history of the modern and postmodern dance in New York. So it's always great to see dance included. So if anyone could speak about it, it would be terrific.
Yeah, that was from the School of the Arts, before it was named Ruth Asawa San Francisco School of the Arts. And it was a collaboration between the dance department and the theater tech department, which was projecting the film behind. And then my mother worked with the art students, the visual artists, and they built these paper folds. And then the dancers had to go figure out what to do with them once they were made. It was quite beautiful. And I think it was made out of a heavier weight, like a manila weight paper, because she could get big rolls of paper from the printers. So it had some kind of stability for multiple uses. It could be used more than once without being crushed. Yeah.
All right, we have time for one last question.
has anybody addressed the possibility or the probability of Ruth Asawa having changed the world in a way with her activities in San Francisco and with the art? I don't know of many places that have art programs like she started and fostered. No?
Well, you know what's going on with the art program, a lot of it was, this is an amazing confluence of timing, I think, because it was women who were artists or skilled technicians of some kind of craft who were home raising children before the women's liberation movement had really kicked in, and women could go out and get real jobs, paying jobs. And so there was that going on. There was also an incredible depression. So there was the CETA workforce development program that suddenly there was funding, federal funding for artists to go into the schools, which was very similar to the WPA, which is what she experienced as a young child. She had people who taught opera, puppet making, the visual arts as a young girl. Can you imagine the magic that would have been coming from the farm to see that kind of transformation? So, and then it was somebody who put the effort in. My mother worked really, really hard and the other mothers. It was a cause that they were building something. And what happened is they had to fight all the unions. They had to fight the painters union, the buildings and grounds people, so that a child could put in a garden. We could put in a garden, or we could paint the walls, because normally you couldn't put any marks on the walls. So that kind of has gone by the way. I think pretty much most schools now, children are allowed to go and do things. But it is a huge investment that I don't think society really makes. Like, we don't have childcare and, all that.
Thank you.
So I'd like to thank you so much, both of you.
And I want to thank, as Marilyn said, thank you, Edward Kopp, Kirsten Marples, for this amazing exhibition and the beautiful catalog and all the work that went into really thinking through who Ruth Asawa
as you mentioned earlier, it was very much a Californian experience. You were all amazing, and also I remember the experience with the archive, which was like a dream, like a sacred bath of sorts. So thank you very much, and please stay for a glass of wine for the reception now. Thank you so much.